Yeah.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Lex Novus. This is a space where we discuss emerging issues relating to law, technology, policy, and ethics. Stepping away from what we usually do, which is reviews of either cases or policies, upcoming trends, I've decided to actually invite a guest on the show. And this is a long time coming. Sue Anne here, who will introduce herself shortly. She actually met with me about 5 years ago, was it?
2019.
Yeah, about that.
Yeah.
We sat on a panel together in a big data or ethics forum that was ongoing. And I think we shared similar perspectives along the way.
Yeah.
And we said that we wanted to do this then.
Yeah.
It took a while, but here we are finally.
Yep.
So
as long as
Suen,
we arrive.
Yeah. Why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us
Yeah.
your background.
So, hi everyone. Happy to be here. My name is Sue Anne. I am in the communication business. I've always been in the communication business. So I've worked in creative agencies and media agencies, and right now I'm leading a media brand. And I've always been very passionate about how data and tech evolve, especially like in the current age where there are a lot of concerns about, as much good as we've gotten from technology, there's also like a dark side that I think we need to address. So I've always been advocating on like ethics, even though like I'm not a lawyer, like I'm not a fancy practitioner. So yeah, so I'm happy to be here and just like share my thoughts.
Okay, that's great. So, just a caveat before we start, that Sue Anne is here in her personal capacity.
Yeah.
And whatever her background may be in whatever company she comes from, she doesn't represent the thoughts of that organization, and she's here freely giving her thoughts. So we can have a much more open conversation.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I'd like to highlight to the viewers is that this is a conversation. It's not really a grilling session to get Sue Anne to give right answers or wrong answers. It's to stimulate discussion, and that was the idea behind this the whole time, I think. Okay, so coming to the issue, I think the topic that I posed to you was on marketing as a whole, of course, the skew to digital marketing eventually, and how technology has been influencing it over time, and where we're heading with that, specifically with the introduction of artificial intelligence into the space.
Yep.
Now, marketing has been one of those considerably adaptive fields.
Yes.
Over time, it has really picked up on the different technologies that have come about. I think in the 1920s or 30s, you already had the imagery coming out, thinking about advertising in a different way. And what has happened, or at least the observation that we've had, is that with the introduction of new tech, social media being one of the earlier ones, and then later on with the introduction of artificial intelligence and tech of that kind, we've seen grave concern rising. And it seems to be moving the direction of marketing from persuasion, which it traditionally was, I think, into this uncharted space of potential manipulation.
Yep.
Right? And the thing that piqued me about it was this particular quote from Professor Yuval Harari, who's actually a historian, but also dabbles in this space. And he made this comment during an interview. He said, we humans should get used to the idea that we are not mysterious selves. We are now hackable animals, right? Which was rather concerning to me. And I tied it into marketing, the marketing space. So what are your thoughts on this shift from persuasion to manipulation?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question and observation. The onset of digital marketing, especially in social media, has opened a lot of doors for not just traditional brands, but a lot of entrepreneurial, smaller, upcoming brands. And I think the difference between like persuasion and manipulation is really nuanced. Where I think that manipulation it really questions the intention of the marketer. I don't necessarily think that like AI is the cause of, transforming persuasion to manipulation. I don't think so, because I feel like AI is a tool, social media is a platform. But I think over time, when the intention behind developing certain campaigns that are questionable or in terms of ethics, I think that becomes a very gray area. So for example, like to me, the hallmark of the difference between the two is transparency and consent, right? If let's say you were really transparent with your intentions, and you have gotten consent from the user, the customers, then I think like you can nudge them very positively to an action. But if, for example, like you are intentionally hiding something, for example, if you're asking someone to subscribe to a service and you're giving a free trial. So when your trial ends, and if I ask you, like, would you like to continue with a subscription, and you say yes or no, that's transparency, that's consent, right? Yep. But if I were to say, get your credit card's information beforehand, and after you complete your trial and quietly just switch it to a paid subscription where like I'm just leveraging on your forgetfulness, then I think that's questionable. Like, and I have been through that experience myself as a customer of a virus protection brand, okay, which I shall not name names. But it happens, right? Because they feel that, like they can marketing can get away with some things, because there's just too much for the users to remember. So I think that's like, that to me is the intention is the key, whether or not there's any application of technology. Like trickeries have always been around since even the 1920s. Yep. It's just that I think now it's made a lot easier, and a lot of people can pursue these kind of tactics. And here's something that I have a catch-22 kind of situation where how do you then judge like marketers for manipulation if they don't think that it's unethical in the first place? Right, because of algorithms, because of data analytics, because of digital capability, they can do that, right? Like if you were to have this subscription or trial that's offline based, you wouldn't be able to do that, right? You need to get the guy's like signature or something. But because it's on a website, it's so easy on email, right? Like how do you, like where do you draw the line?
Where do you draw the line? Because the standards might be different.
Exactly.
So speaking of standards you mentioned a few words, and we're going to dive into a few of them. We'll take transparency first. So the notion of transparency, we see it when people talk about privacy and data protection worldwide.
Yes.
There's this principle of transparency. But strictly speaking, if you look at our legislation in Malaysia, the PDPA doesn't have transparency as a standalone principle. I mean, you could say that it's garnered from the notice and choice principle. That's there where it says when you're going to take the information, you have to disclose what you're going to use it for. But we've seen the kind of disclosure, it's very broad-based, it's never specific. I was listening to a podcast yesterday where an American litigator was talking about the trends there. And he actually said that they're moving towards a place where they're dissecting actual disclosure. They're actually dissecting to specifics what they are doing with the data, and that's where it's heading. But we don't seem to be in that space just yet. So where do we draw the line? Right. So can I just give you a scenario and tell me in this scenario what be where you draw the line? Say I'm selling something as simple as a coconut. I know back in the day, a coconut would be, it's fresh. It's, you tell me about maybe some nutritional values that are there. I can observe it. And then you move on to a point where I recognize my customer, and my customer is now, I know that they need it when it's a hot day. They tend to buy coconuts, right? It's this marketing thing. So now I've tapped into what my customer wants, so I'm selling it at places where it's hot, by the beach maybe. But now you've got this new angle that comes in, where I'm able to track things like a search that you've done on a particular medication that is tied in specifically to diabetes.
Yeah.
Or you visited a location where I know you've gone for regular health checkups.
Yeah.
Now I market it as a coconut that has the ability to reduce the instance of diabetes because of some, whatever reason. Where would you say that crosses the line or doesn't cross the line?
The beauty of big data is the ability for us to analyze huge chunk of consumer-centric data, right? Like where you buy, how you buy, when you buy, how many you buy. And I always view like data analytics as something positive for marketing, because with data and with analytics, we're able to improve essentially what we're doing. So I can improve on my products, I can improve on my services, I can improve on where you find them, how you find them, how I reach you. So I think personally for me, like in principle, I think it's okay to leverage on big data to improve on my own marketing activities. But the claim is where I feel like we have to be conscious, like whether, if you're a diabetic, like should you be drinking coconuts in the first place? So for me is it can be done. It doesn't mean that it should be done. Right? But within the health claims that we have and we are approved to claim, then I think like we can, I can market you at the beach, I can market you like near a hospital or whatever that is. But the claim behind the advertising piece, I feel like that needs a lot more governance, regulation. Yeah. And speaking of transparency, right? Like I think the issue is because everything is moving in breakneck speed. And the regulators are the last to catch up. And for APAC, not just Malaysia, I think for APAC, like this digital economy is really driving a lot of growth, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like while this growth is happening and businesses and people are enjoying this growth and they're enjoying this digital lifestyle, everything is suddenly so convenient. I think the governance or the consciousness of, how, like, hang on guys, like how do we use these responsibly? I think those kind of conversations, it's not that it's not there, it's just not catching up fast enough as the growth. So by the time we reach a certain place, then technology has evolved, like, and then generative AI comes in and it's gone. Like, it's like, so I feel like we have to be faster in addressing all this. And that's why there are digital ministries, because you do need like a dedicated specialist, where I believe that a lot of the issues is regulators are not experts. And experts don't care too much about regulation. And I think that's where the friction is. Regulators have to work with hand in hand with experts to make sure that, at least we're addressing the problem at the right speed.
Okay. But let's put aside tech for a second.
Yeah.
Right? Put aside the digital ministries and the tech. You brought up something very interesting, that in the space of marketing in itself, you need to have certain standards as to what's ethical and what's not, the type of marketing that you're doing. Does the industry have standards, considering it's been around for, well over a century now?
Yeah. I think in Malaysia, we do have like the content governance, where there are some guidelines that advertisers cannot break. For example, like no advertising to kids, no advertising to children below 12, or even, there were some discussions on raising the age limit up to 17. So I think there are good people behind these organizations that are trying to drive and put guardrails. But I think in the digital space where you have companies, tech companies that allow children's channels and they, like there's options, right? So if you govern too hard on broadcast media, for example, advertisers will shift the dollars to tech companies, and it's not really. I feel like it's then not really a balanced economy, a media economy in Malaysia. I think we should be promoting and encouraging like ethical practices, but not in the expense of just okay. So like TV, you can't do that. You can't advertise to children, and then we have a double standard.
Okay.
With like the digital platforms like search and OTT, and say like, oh, okay, like because they're operating out of Malaysia, like we can't do anything. So I feel like we need to enforce more balance across the board, because at the end of the day, we're here to protect the consumers.
Right. So I'll latch on that this specific point on children. Interesting that you brought that up. I've got this is an article that just came out actually. The Children's Advertising Review Unit, CARU, of the BBB National Programs. They've issued a compliance notice specifically to deal with AI-generated content targeted at children specifically. And they highlighted a few areas where they think, areas of concern. And I think it's really because children fall into that category where they can't fully distinguish between reality and that which is not. So some of the things that they raised were AI-generated deepfakes.
Yep.
So deepfakes being things that are simulated, and you're simulating realistic people or places or even voices. Product depictions that use copy, sound or visual representations that are generated. Fantasy, AI-generated imagery, and creation of character avatars. So these were all raised as concerns, and these are concerns that go beyond, because it's in the US, they have a specialized dedicated legislation for that COPPA, the online privacy protection. And this is going beyond that. And I think they recognize that AI is a concern when it comes to kids, and what's being generated. And this goes far beyond the issue of copyright, which we'll talk about later, any of that. It's really the molding of the character of children. What are your thoughts on that, and what we can do over here maybe in Malaysia?
So I wanted to share like a video that I came across, I think like 2 days ago. So it was I think it was like a TikTok video that was done by a father, and basically it was the video is about like distance friendship between like a 3-year-old in somewhere with another 3-year-old somewhere else. Like it was just like an online kind of friendship, and these 2 3-year-olds, very cute, they see each other. But the difference is the one that was away in another country, like she had a filter on. So she had like whiskers, like really cute whiskers. Every time they FaceTime, like she had really cute whiskers on.
Yeah.
So both parents decided like, okay, let's meet up. Like let's catch up. So they met up, and they thought that their daughter will be very excited to see the friend. And so when they met up in the playground, the daughter just ran past that online friend whom she was very excited to meet. And they found out that it was because she couldn't recognize the girl. She thought the girl was a cat.
Right.
So I feel like you're absolutely right and spot on in that. I think one, what we adults think, and we can differentiate, like, well, that's just a filter. We cannot assume that children are able to tell the difference. That's one. And I think that's what this article is about, right? Now, number two, I would challenge that, yes, we need to protect our children more, but somehow I feel like every generation is increasingly resilient than the one before. And they will come to a point where they will evolve and they will be able to figure how to protect themselves better. Eventually, I feel like that's evolution. But there are other vulnerable groups that we're not addressing,
Okay.
like your elderly. I highly doubt
Yes.
that our parents can tell a deep fake video from a real one. Like I highly doubt that. B40s, people who are forgotten in the fringes of society, who may not have constant access to technology, who may not be well versed with how technology is evolving. So I feel like we should be more conscious that there are more vulnerable groups that we have to do something as well, because they might be taken advantage of, and yeah, like it's and they're still part of society. They're still functioning within the society. But if, let's say, they were to watch a video which is fake and they really couldn't tell whether it's fake news or it's real news, it has a lot of detrimental effect, right? Like if an elderly, a 75-year-old grandmother, like if she couldn't tell the difference between a real video talking about supplements that she should take or she shouldn't take, like that has very strong implication to her decisions, because she's still functioning, she's still able to take care of herself, but the information may change her decisions for her health or for her family, and I feel like we should not forget these groups as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. That there's definitely a whole different spectrum when it comes to vulnerable components of society and elements of them. Children part of it, a bit selfish on my side. I've got 2 young kids. Personally, I've taken the approach that I don't think it's enough to leave them to their devices and figure it out, because it's just too dangerous.
Yes.
And I think there hasn't been enough of a concerted effort to educate children, even parents, because you're talking about deepfakes. They are at a stage where they're influencing elections of a country.
Yeah.
So it's across the board. Every age is being affected, and I think education plays a large role in this. And there hasn't been enough in terms of education of children, parents, teachers, as to what the risks are and what to look out for. Red flags. And there are tools. It's something we're actually working on in the space with one of the companies that I'm with. So we'll move on from there to data exploitation, right? Potential exploitation, at least. There has been a lot of talk that monetization and the focus on money and profits goes well above privacy, and not just data protection, but privacy as a whole. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this, as to whether there are concerns that are arising, whether there are sufficient measures in terms of privacy or even data protection, from your perspective.
Well, I think, again, I would say, don't shoot the messenger, which is, in this instance, is data, right? I feel, or I do see a lot of upside using data to improve everything that we do. But I do agree with you, how we utilize the data for profit. It's a gray area. It's a questionable for some. And I think, again, I will circle back to what I said earlier about transparency and getting consent from people, right? I'm very sure that you are using a lot of apps and you're using a lot of digital services, which I think you don't really know how your data is used, because it's automatic, right? Like if you use the platform, and by virtue of that, you're consenting for your information to be used. Yeah. So I think the future of winners, of real tech winners, are those who take a stand on this and say that, we will be more transparent, and we in helping people to understand like what the data is being used, and what the data is being sold to who, for what purpose. And when I say do better in this transparency, is again, I've watched this video once that kind of shows, I think most major apps that we're using, like what's the length in centimeters.
Consent, like, yes.
And some of it just goes on and on and on.
Yes, that's right.
And that itself, like having the terms in a 2-point font size that stretches like meters of paper, like that itself for me is, I think it's a legal tactic, right?
Possibly, yes.
Yeah, it's a legal tactic. So we need to do better in that. Like, and I believe that not all tech companies are bad. I think they are doing, I would like to believe, their level best to improve themselves. But like I said, if they're achieving hundreds of millions of subscribers, like billions of subscribers, in like twice the speed that the previous tech company has achieved. Like we're talking about that level of speed where, again, the regulators, the legal team needs to catch up. Yeah, like before, I mean, it's a very different environment. If 10 people is using it versus like 10 billion people are, I think we haven't cracked that transparency code. Like how to be more genuine, I guess. Yeah.
Let's talk about consent, maybe, right? Which you brought up. It's really difficult to get consent in the first place. I mean, consent has been sort of like embedded in data protection since its onset, right? So drawing on, we're talking about decades of this being there. I personally think that the consent principle is a bit flawed. Yes. Because what it does is it puts the onus on the user, the data subject themselves, to sort of agree to things.
Yes.
And as you pointed out, spectrum of society, even the most knowledgeable, even the people who are in privacy, like myself, we still agree to terms that are long, winding, and we still don't know exactly where our data is being taken.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on additional guardrails?
Yeah.
Right, beyond consent. So consent being a bare minimum that you must get.
Yes.
But beyond that, companies, and so for example, in your space, in marketing, for example, having additional guardrails beyond just consent that they need to comply with.
Yeah. I think it's going to be difficult simply because it's an ecosystem. There are too many players involved, right? Like, so let's say, for example, you go into a publication website and they ask like, we're tracking your cookies. Do you like say yes or no or decline or whatever? But because the data is going to advertisers, right? Advertising platforms and then to advertisers. So I feel like there are too many people in the ecosystem that makes, to a certain extent, I think, self-regulation ineffective.
Okay.
Right? Like I can put on my high horse and say like, you know what, like we don't do all of these. But then the clients will say like, but we don't care.
You want to see an outcome.
Yeah, and then the platforms say like, oh, but the guardrails that you're requesting for, like we're not there yet. So I think I feel like they need to be a neutral, independent party that has clout over the ecosystem. And I like to think that the best person to do that is the government.
Okay.
Yeah. Because, I mean, of course, like they should get a lot of consultation, stakeholders, input. But I think you do need someone that does not have a vested interest in the ecosystem. Because if you rely on the companies themselves and all the players to self-regulate, like I feel like that's a very utopian.
The bias is just too strong, possibly, you know.
Yeah, because we will always put our priorities first to a certain extent. Yeah. So you imagine, right? Like a toy company versus a company that sells just, I don't know, like bread or clothes. Like they won't have the same they won't have the same vested interest in children advertising.
Right.
So if you put the guardrails on children advertising on these guys only, and then they go like that's not fair. Like why am I the only one getting the hit? So I feel like there's no one size fit all, and there's no way of pleasing everyone. So my opinion is we have to always go back to the consumers, to people, and see what are the things that are affecting them, and maybe sometimes take a stronger stand and say like, okay, this has to stop. Like we have to put a stop to this.
But as an industry player, I mean, there are things that a company in any space, whatever industry, can decide on.
Yes.
Right? For example, if you're a heavy data user, whatever the industry is, you can decide where the data comes from. So one of the big controversies at the moment is in the industry of data brokerage, right?
Yes.
And I mean, it's grown. Last I heard, I think in 2021, it was like a $300 billion industry. It's growing to a $500+ billion industry now, meaning that there's a huge demand for it.
Yeah.
But regulation-wise, it's absolutely minimal.
Yeah.
Right? In many places in the world, there's no regulation. From what I hear in the US, they're just beginning to impose registration requirements just to say, hi, here I am. I am a data broker. Not really regulating the operations of the data broker.
Yeah.
And the impact that we're seeing is FTC, I think, just issued 2 warnings to companies who collected location data.
Yeah.
Now, they collect location data on the basis that we want to collect your location data, we get your consent, and this is for us to provide direct advertising to you based on your needs, more personalized ads. And that's always the notion.
Yeah.
But they find out later that it's being sold to multiple other third parties, embedded, hidden away in long documents, as you pointed out.
Yeah.
And beyond that, it's even being, in some cases, being passed to the government.
Yeah.
Right, on the pretense of national security, but no one knows about it. And this is location data that is pinging like hourly.
Yeah.
An individual's location data.
Yeah.
Quite sensitive.
So see, that's the thing, right? Like I feel like the problem with that is this company is just not governed well. Like for example, if you were a small cottage business making tofus, selling in Malaysia, and they found out that your home factory is in a horrendous state, like it's like, rat droppings everywhere. Like, so for me is because the way that you manage your business and you have decided to maximize profit, but because no one is doing those checks until someone eats your tofu and falls sick, and then they backtrack and then they go like, okay, that person bought the tofu from this shop, and wow, when the health ministry rates it and they go like, oh my god, this is horrendous, like this shouldn't be how businesses are operated. They need to be have cleanliness certificate and all this. So I feel like my question would then be, how did this company get away with like selling data in the first place? And it's the same thing as how did we lose millions of Malaysians' data from certain banks, certain telco companies, certain, how did those data get into market? So I feel like...
But if we were to look at it, because there are 2 ends of this, right? One is the producers of the data themselves.
Yeah.
So the data brokers are collecting this data from them. Using your analogy, that would be the shop, the tofu droppings, the droppings in the tofu shop, sorry. Now, you've got the other end of the spectrum. tofu is being delivered to a larger restaurant
Yes.
that is using that tofu. Now, these are, let's put a label on them for purposes of our discussion, marketing companies.
Yes.
Now, they're collecting the data, they're using, they're processing. Now, don't you think it's possibly advisable, or it could be a standard, where marketing companies should be checking on these vendors
Yep.
that are supplying the data to them
Yeah.
to find out where it's coming from, what are your standards, how did you collect it, and the mechanisms that you've used.
Yeah.
Otherwise it's just a situation of no accountability
Yeah.
in the trail.
And I really want to build on that
Yeah.
in a different field so that we can kind of see the comparison,
Okay.
right? But before that, and because I'm here as a personal capacity,
Yep.
but I do want to highlight that I'm really proud that my company, my media group, we do have something called the Media Responsibility Index.
Right.
So we publish this index because globally we want to check who our data suppliers are, what media platforms that we're using, how are they promoting trust with their users, how are their algorithms regulated. And so we run this index every year to sort of get a sense check on the policy developers in certain social media companies.
Right.
So we don't do it as in a very hard-handed way where, like, okay, then we are not going to buy from you. But I think we're trying to be a more positive player in the ecosystem where we encourage them like, hey, like we are for diversity, we are for trust, we are for, we're against fake news.
Yeah.
So you need to do better to govern your own platform and your own company in order to do business with us. So we do have that in place, but it's a very big wall.
Yep.
And there are a lot of countries that are not operating at the same level of, I guess, ethics. Countries, I mean, like I said, you can't go to like a third world country and expect them to behave like a first world country simply because if starvation and poverty is still something that they are fighting for every day. Like you can't go there and say, hey, you know what? Like you got to be vegan. You can't eat meat because it's not sustainable. So when they don't even have food. So, and I'm not saying like that should be an excuse. What I'm saying is that's the reality of the situation. And we need to do better to like I said, there's no one size fit all kind of solution, but we need to do better to sort of consider the situation or the environment where these companies are operating in, whether it's a country, it's a region, or whatever that is. Now, the other, I guess, context that I want to draw a parallel in, which helps us to also understand better, is ESG, right? So a lot of companies are going out in public and say like, yeah, we have an ESG strategy, and then we're shifting, we have a net zero carbon type ambition, and we're putting out EVs, like we're cutting down on our reliance on non-renewable fuels. Sounds great, but I would challenge these companies like, are you greening your supply chain? So for some companies, they can, right? They have the liberty to pick and choose, like who are their partners, who are their vendors that fit into their vision. But then there are companies that don't have that luxury because it might bankrupt them, like because cost is a huge, it's a huge success factor. So likewise, like I totally agree that the shop or the restaurant should have made checks on the tofu company, on the tofu manufacturer, and say like, look guys, like you're not hygienic, like, and we're not gonna get tofu from you anymore. And that is if they knew that it was an unhygienic practice in the first place. But if let's say, all you see is a van that delivers you the tofu at a very attractive price, I think I'm giving marketers a benefit of doubt that they're not going to even, because it's a lot of work to spot check everybody, right? And then my question is the standard of hygiene. If I'm OCD, I'm like, it has to be like spotless. And then you go like, oh, you know what? Like as long as it's not dangerous to human health, I think we can close one eye. So even that, I feel like we have differences.
Right.
So in this space and in this topic that we're tackling, what I'm saying is there are a lot of nuances. Yeah, and it's kind of difficult to say like, yeah, you should do this, you should do this. Like in a perfect world, all of us should do that. But unfortunately, like that's not reality.
Okay. Let's move to profiling.
Yeah.
So profiling is something that I think is it's quite it's been around in different ways, shapes and forms, different industries, insurance industry, marketing as well. The method of profiling has been different. But now with the advent of AI, it's become something which is, you're drawing from so many different angles, creating profiles which are actually very accurate. And even in some cases, using them to predict what a person might be doing. Now, in the space of marketing, what are your thoughts on profiling, particularly using AI technology?
Yeah. So profiling is a specialized skill, right? If I have a lot of customers' data, and if I am and usually if I'm the analytics or insights person within a company, like that's my job. And I do believe that there is a science to ensure the robustness of the profiles and to ensure the data quality and to ensure that due diligence is done. Now, what happens is, so like you said, we've been doing this like as old as marketing was invented. But the problem is when with AI or with data platforms that make access to profiles so easy and so convenient and just by subscription, it then really makes us question on the robustness of those profiles. What are they used for? How are they used? I think the biggest difference between then and now is the speed of these things are created. The cost has obviously gone down a lot. So again, like the edge is the fact that, if I'm marketing a product or service, like I now know who I'm marketing to better. But how these profiles are used by who, for what purpose, again, like I think that's where there is a danger of manipulation. Yeah, but I don't necessarily see it as a negative thing, because I feel like it only makes our intention more accurate. But if I wouldn't name names, but like the, Big 5 personality traits, the Cambridge Analytica kind of scandal, that's profiling.
Yep.
Right? And what are they used for? They use it for misinformation. They use it for... So I feel like you can't have all the good things, but we need to do better to minimize the negative outcomes or the negative impacts from the usage of these things. But unfortunately, when we democratize profiles online, it no longer just sits in the hands of the experts, right? And experts are governed by ethics, code of conduct, accountability. But in the hands of like people who don't have, like, who just, I don't know, like I don't belong to any company, like any fancy company, and I feel like I can use this technique to get more sale, to improve like my profit margin. Like, why not?
Right.
Right? And I think, how do you govern that? It's basically human being. We got to make better human beings.
Well,
Because
to some extent, yes.
yeah.
So let's talk about one of the uses of a
Yeah.
profile, right? We've talked about this before, nudging.
Yes.
All right. So it comes back actually to that whole argument of persuasion and manipulation. But the concept of nudging in particular. So for users, listeners who haven't actually heard of this concept or this theory, became famous in 2008 by a book released by Richard H. Thaler. And in that book, I mean, he was actually talking about the positive side of nudging,
Yeah.
which was health, wealth, happiness, which is a use. And the notion of nudging is to it's choice architecture, right? So setting up things in a particular way to push your behavior, drive your own behavior by your own choice, supposedly by your own
Yeah.
choice in a particular direction. And we find governments creating departments to nudge social behavior of entire communities to healthy eating, to follow guidelines of pedestrian crossings on the road, to be more aware of things, right? And that's positive nudging. But of course, with every tool, there's a dark side to it. And nudging has been seen in marketing to be a bit more than a nudge sometimes, a bit more of a shove, in a particular direction.
That's a good one.
So where do you see this sitting in industries, particularly in marketing, specifically in digital marketing?
Yeah.
Because touch points are increasing a lot, especially in maybe social media, for example, where you're nudging people to do certain things with this additional data and these profiles that have been built.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if you heard of something called dark patterns. So dark patterns are essentially UX and UI type of design on like websites or app or anything to nudge you towards an intended action, right? So there's one example of the dark patterns that I came across was really amusing. It's called confirm shaming. So confirm shaming is like, for example, you're in a page selling you some health products, and then they're asking you to sign up, and then you click no, but instead of just the button no, it says like, no, I want to remain fat forever.
Yeah.
Like that's bullying,
Yes.
right? But because there's no one there, so I feel like these are called nudges, and I totally agree with you that psychologies or social psychologies created, or studied this term, is to ensure that we're nudging people to positive behavior. But then when you realize that, okay, like you can nudge people to do anything, right? And so there are these practices, right? And I just want to touch on, like I said, I don't have an answer for it, but I just want to provide clarity on how things have evolved. So during the era of startups, where you are required to grow exponentially at zero marketing budget, what do you rely on? You rely on tools that you have, UX, UI, your website, and these kind of nudges, right? Like, should the button be red? Should the button be black? Like, and my point is, when marketers realize that they can do it, and it brings good profit and it's working, so they continue. And before you know it, it's become a norm. Until maybe some humanist developer said like, oh my God, like this is not a good practice. Like this is wrong. Like it's not ethical. You're basically manipulating people in your website. But then by that time, when there is this kind of whistleblower, it's already become a norm. Consumers have accepted to be shamed on these kind of websites. And every time when there is a new digital experience, the consumer's own expectation of digital experience just resets. And like I said, I'm not saying like, yeah, if something it's made more convenient for them, like it's about resetting that experience, right? But if they not knowingly are being nudged, by certain design practices, they wouldn't be able to tell that they've been duped, or they will feel frustrated. And that's the thing, right? I said, if at all in any of your interaction or transaction, and you feel you've been cheated, like there's an internal alarm clock in you that makes you feel frustrated, or you've been cheated, then you know that that's not right.
So what happens in a situation where, okay, I'll give you an example that I have here actually. But sometime in about 2006, this was way back.
Yeah.
I was an individual working, I think he was with Mozilla at the time. He was developing movements of maps. So you know how the maps would load, and you'd have to reload the maps again and again every time you wanted to view a new area. And he said, why can't we automatically reload these maps so the user has a nice interface they move through? And this individual's name is Asa Raskin. So he invented infinite scroll, but he invented it for the purpose of these maps and a few other linked applications. And then he thought that, wouldn't it be really useful for companies like Google? You know, you have a Google search. I'll have infinite scroll, so instead of clicking from page 1 to page 2, which is why we have it now. So he went around promoting this tech. Now, fast forward a few years, and social media starts to pick up. Now, social media's come into the fray, and they realize infinite scrolling is amazing because it gives you a dopamine hit.
Yeah.
It keeps you hooked. And I actually have some of the things that Asa Raskin said himself about this technology. It says, you don't give your brain time to catch up with your impulses. You just keep scrolling. Now, he recognizes this, yeah? It's as if they're taking behavioral cocaine and just sprinkling it all over your interface. And that's the thing that keeps you coming back and back and back. So he recognizes that this was something that he never intended for. It's available on all social media platforms. It's what we all go through. It's terrible for health. There are terms for it. There's doom scrolling, it's called. And it's having a real impact on the old, the young, and everything in between. Knowing this, and in the space of marketing, digital marketing in particular, feeds into the system.
Yeah.
Right? And they recognize that, you know, I'm going to get a hell of a lot more sales. I'm going to do well for my clients using these platforms, doing what it does. Now, everyone knows what it's doing, but nothing's really stopping it.
Yeah.
You know, at best, you get 1 or 2 legislations that come out in selected countries which say you have to limit the amount of scrolls that you have when it comes to a particular age.
Yeah.
Why a particular age? I mean, we still get dopamine hits when we go through it at our age. So there's limited interference by regulators. Everyone knows that it's concerning and alarming. And here's a space for marketers to come in and do digital marketing and profit from it. So do you think it's a problem that because of availability, you know, the platform's right there, that they are allowed to use it, they're going to use it anyway? And where should the onus be on putting a stop to things like this that are really affecting worldwide communities?
Yeah. I guess, like, my question, like, I'll throw the question back to you.
Yep.
I don't have data to back this up, but in my opinion, the question is, was this infinite scrolling that came first, or the advertising revenue that came first? So if it was the social media platforms that discovered, like, oh, we can make money from ad dollars. So the question is, how do we make people stay on our site longer?
Yeah.
So I think, again, like I said, it's hard at this point, even though all these are facts, but it's kind of hard to pinpoint, like, which one came first. And I suspect it was the ad revenue, the opportunity of more ad revenue.
Yeah.
And hence, social media platforms are changing the interface and optimizing the interface for ad dollars. Because, you know, if I can get more people stay online, spend more time with me, then the advertisers will come.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, because I remember the olden days of the first version of Facebook, like it's nothing like what it is today. Yeah, and it's free that time. You just poke people and that's all, right? So I think like over time, I think in this case, not that I want to defend marketers, but it's really because like marketers, we're only looking at where we can reach our audience.
Right.
We're not a moral police. And we cannot be. Because if we are, there are a lot of things that we shouldn't be doing, right? Right? Like in all platforms, not just social media, but also in broadcast, also in print, in a lot of things. So I think like, are marketers not interested in this conversation? I don't think so. I think seasoned ones, established companies and established brands, they do know that they have to stand for bigger cause and a bigger purpose for them to remain relevant with the modern consumer because it's expected from them. But are they the ones who should be governing these platforms? I don't think so.
Do you think they can exert influence? Because clearly the platforms have one of the most massive roles to play. We've had leaders of these platforms called up to Congress multiple times, US Congress, to explain themselves on different issues. Do you think that marketers or people using these platforms, marketing industry as a whole, could play a role in shifting the tide? Because of course, clearly it's not just one element. Like the marketing industry won't operate as a singular. It's different countries, different organizations, different sizes, but a role could be played by them to shift the tide towards something that is possibly a little bit more ethical, or at least look at these issues, consider what might be a solution.
So my thought is this. So if I were to think in Malaysia, there is a Malaysia Advertiser Association.
Right.
And all the members are advertisers. They're all brands and marketers. So realistically, I'm thinking, so if these guys were to go to the office of Meta or TikTok or Google, would they be able to move the needle? Realistically speaking,
do you have enough leverage?
Exactly, right? Because Malaysia is a very small market to these giants. It's important for them, but in the scheme of bigger things, it is really not a very large market. And also the setup in this country for these platforms, I don't think it's within their jurisdiction for this kind of discussion anyway. But I'm going to challenge this thought, right? So if 30 million in Malaysia is a small nation, then how about 650 million of ASEAN population? Because everybody's facing the same problem. And I think to a certain extent, the ASEAN community is more homogeneous compared to if you were to compare us with Europe, the environment, the market, the economy, everything is different.
Yes.
But within us and the Philippines and Thailand or Indonesia, we have a lot more common challenges. So would then, if the ASEAN leaders were to speak to these giants, would it then move the needle? I don't know. But that's a thought.
It's definitely a thought.
Yeah.
Okay, we've talked a lot about the outside. Excuse me. We've talked a lot about the the impact on consumers.
Yeah.
Let's look internally, because in marketing companies, in particular, the usage of AI-based tools is something that happens, right? So any new tech that's coming up, they are very quick adopters, and they use a lot of it. So what are your thoughts on the recent trend, for example, the use of generative AI, both for imagery, for text, internally for producers, for marketing agencies around the country, and your thoughts on whether or not there's a concern in using these tools?
So it's good that you brought up this topic because I am in the middle of my AI transformation journey for my own company. And so what we did was we ran a research company-wide just to get a sense, like who's using what AI tool. But I think there's only one or two tools that everyone's using. So I think a couple of things that I wanted to find out from the survey is what is the penetration rate like of using generative AI within the company? That's one. And two is what kinds of benefit do people see from using these tools or want to achieve from using these tools? And we land in two outcomes, right? One is I want to exponentially improve my output, whatever that I do, whether it's like a proposal or idea or analytics or whatever that is. I want to increase the quality of my output substantially. And the other one is I want to be more efficient, like especially very tasks that are mundane and it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of repetition. Like I want to reduce time taken to do these tasks. So we actually identified like these tasks that we think are critical in improving our productivity, not just being more efficient, but improving our quality in general. And so for me, I am a huge advocate because we have to move forward with AI. We cannot say like, okay guys, like everybody stop doing because, and I think it is more important to teach and guide them to use it responsibly, to question AI, use it as a tool, like a calculator, so that you don't have to do mental arithmetics and and also to share with them like the potential dark side, which is copyright, which is inaccuracy of information, which is like sources that are fake, forgery. So I think it's important for education to happen. We can't just leave them to figuring out things themselves because in our group, our communication group, we also have compliance. We also have very strong guidelines on how we should be using, especially open source platforms. So I think we cannot assume that everyone has the same knowledge and information as we do. So we're just going to assume like, okay, we're going to start everyone from scratch, and we're going to have a do list and a do not do list, and help them to use the tool better to improve themselves. So I feel like it's while we are encouraging people to utilize these great tools, but we are also trying very hard to educate them and instilling that moral compass by sharing with them what is our internal compliance, what is our internal guideline, what are the ethical questions that we don't have answers for, but you should absolutely, have that in mind.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear that actually from both from industry leader and someone who's leading an organization, because it's quite the reverse in my industry. It's a very, I guess, very opposed to change, very slow to change. And the notion of, especially generative AI, if you speak to the average lawyer in the street, the notion is, look at that one American case where the lawyer used generative AI and was pulled up by the courts and was sanctioned. I mean, it was one-off bad use, which really shouldn't have been used in that way. But I think the education aspect that you spoke about, that's really important.
I feel like we cannot afford to shy away from this, but we have to move forward with it, right? And the best thing is, whatever solutions that we can come up with, even in this year, it might be obsolete next year. But that's that's our job to constantly evolve. And I remember when we met in the Big Gig conference before, and I was advocating for ethics community, right? People who are neutral, put together by a community, and they can sort of judge whether this is right, this is wrong. But for me, at that time, there's no generative AI, right? And now, like, the solution of having an ethics community is such a slow solution to generative AI. So maybe in the future, we need AI to govern us, to use AI responsibly, right? We need to develop AI to tell us that there is biasness in this algorithm. So we need to figure out the solution that has the same scale and speed. So I feel like even our solutions, it's not like yesteryears where when we pass a bylaw, like, and then that's going to stay forever for a long time. I feel like now anything that has got to do with digital, with the internet, like, it needs to be constantly reviewed, simply because the tech environment is changing so rapidly. And like I said, like on the infinite scrolling type of, like when tech was created, I think it wasn't.
You don't anticipate what it's going to be used
like
for.
He was just saying that, it just makes this more convenient for everyone. Over time, someone else has picked it up and said, hey, this is a great idea about this. And it becomes something else. So we have to evolve faster, make decisions faster. We have to be more agile.
So speaking of the future, agility, I think, just to cap off our discussion, which could go on forever. I think. Do you anticipate any future concerns, right, as it stands, with, I guess, types of data, types of technologies that are coming up, emerging trends, or even movements in the market that you see that could be of concern? And I'll premise this question with a recent update has happened, and this is to do with mental privacy and integrity. This is cutting edge stuff. So we've got a report that came out just last week from Claudia Roda. Claudia Roda is the chair of UNESCO's AI Human Rights Committee at the moment. And she is pointing out that in the field of neuro, that's the particular word that they're using, neurotechnology, right? They're pointing towards this upcoming trend of neurotechnology. And I say upcoming, it's actually been building over a number of years, but it's picked up speed really at this point. And it's quite alarming because of the capability and the accuracy of what you're seeing. You're seeing things like, thought being converted into image. Right, with an accuracy rate of 90.7%, and brain images at 75%. So these are very accurate imagery, and what it can be used for, highly questionable. And so UNESCO is actually running a current campaign to get input from around the world as to what the standards of ethics should be. So I think this closes on the 12th of July. I'll be linking to anyone who wants to contribute for this. But what are your thoughts in terms of emerging technologies like this? Because you can see where this would go in terms of marketing. What's in my head is no longer private. And access to that kind of data, and then just saying that it's been anonymized or pseudonymized, it's just not enough. So the level of intrusion, it's increasing. So do you see any concerns with not just with this, but any other kinds of trends?
I think, speaking on these neurotechnology, like you said, it's not something very new in marketing. Like not marketing per se, but consumer research. So we've done researches with consented participants, where we wire them up, with some technology and some wearables to sort of see, what are their emotions when we play certain films or certain ads. And we can even track like eyeballs, like where they're looking at in a... And I think the important thing is, those are research. And it's been there for a long time. It's not anything new. It's been there with technology. But it was very expensive to deploy. So not many companies would opt for this kind of research because it's just so expensive. So where I think this will happen is it will bring down the cost of technology tremendously if it's democratized, and more marketers will then say, oh, okay, I like to know how people feel about my packaging. Like, so if I can see the image in their brain, then I can fix whatever that I need to fix. So again, like, I wouldn't put the onus on marketers, because again, I think they should be ethical in terms of their practices, as whatever the guardrail is that's defined by their company. But I really don't think that they should be a moral police. That's one. Because, like, if I genuinely want to improve my packaging so that it appeals to the people that I want to sell to, I honestly, personally don't see what is wrong with this kind of research if the participant has already consented to the research, right? But if it was used without my consent, now that's a different story. Like if I was walking in the mall and suddenly like you could see things from my brain, like that's a different story. So I think we will see more and more this kind of technology, and there will always be an argument, right? Like for someone who's paralyzed or who cannot talk, that is their form of communication. So I feel like we shouldn't hamper we shouldn't hamper the development of technology because of fear. That's one thing. And like you said, like, do I see any other technology that could be, that could change the environment so much that there are too many? Like, and we're not even talking about like these technology are founded in the R&D centers of NASA. Like, we're not even talking at that level. It could be like a bedroom of a 15-year-old kid who's been coding, right? So new technology is going to come out from everywhere and anywhere, right? And I will go back to what I said earlier. We have, and you said as well, on education. We have to make better human beings, and that will be the difference. And we have to figure a solution that helps us to scale ethics as fast as generative AI.
Now, on that note, I'll give you an example about the time just before I remember, 6 years ago maybe, I was in a conference in Singapore and they were talking about data protection, and they were getting feedback from CEOs in particular of certain organizations. I remember this one CEO going up and he had actually taken proposed guidelines from a consultant as to how to send out emails according to data protection policy at the time. So you can imagine 6 years ago, still fairly nascent, and the policy and guidelines were shaky. This person was advocating what he saw happening in Europe that happened many years ago, and he suggested these guidelines. Before you send out an email, you do step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And this CEO basically went up there and said, if I follow your steps, it's going to take me more than 3 days to reply to half a day's worth of emails. It's impossible. I can't do it. Now you fast forward 5 years and the regulator comes out and says, if you don't follow these steps, you're going to be prosecuted. So it's not a question of difficulty, and you find organizations being very resistant to change. Similar in Malaysia. You talk to them about, let's talk about AI ethics, and they talk about compliance at bare minimum with the PDPA. And there's this sort of a block against moving forward. But what's happening, the trend is that there are acts, there are legislation that's being drafted well across the world. The EU AI Act didn't pass. We're going to feel it tripples the same way that we felt the GDPR come in.
Yeah.
We do business with Europe, so it is going to affect. Let's not just talk about Malaysia, but ASEAN as a whole. So when that happens, you're expending cost to change the structure of your organization. You have to do what you're doing now, research into your organization to see what's going on. You're already expending its cost. So how would you suggest to change mindsets of organizations to preempt rather than react to, a change in legislation or a change in forced mandatory measures that are being imposed?
Yeah. And honestly, my simple answer to that is leadership. I mean, like you said, like at the end of the day, we're all, even though we're worlds apart on the map, but the world is a lot closer than it is like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, because we're all interconnected somehow, socially, politically, economically, right? So if there's a certain change in another continent, it's just a matter of time that it will just, we will feel the effects of it as well. So for me, there are some companies that would, great, I will wait. Yeah. I will wait until I have no choice and I have to change and then I'll change. But then there are some companies who go like, this is not right. And I'll see what I can do to drive that change in my space, right? And I think, again, that's why I say it boils down to leadership. Like, what kind of leaders do we have? Because ultimately, whether or not that legislation is definitely important, because it is important and it's proven important in some parts of the other parts of the world. But if, let's say, the leader does not put priority in this, and I think in most Asian countries, the priority is on revenue and profit, then you're going to get a lot of laggards. People who are not in front of the innovation curve and just waiting for the day where they have no choice but to change. So again, I will give you a context on climate change. Everybody knows, we're like sitting ducks. Yeah. So why are companies not changing, right? But it's only when Bank Negara said, look guys, if you don't change your practice, no more loans. then so I feel like these are also nudges. And so I'm saying like the government needs to put more incentive or nudges in place, or and not just talk about it. Because in reality, like when it comes to revenue and profit, I think I think it's a very difficult choice. Even though it should be for companies to make the right decision. Because I think all they're thinking is, okay, I have like a 2,000 people factory. My job is to make sure that all of them has a job. Yeah, so I think like we need to work as a team. The government, the private sector, and the public sector, and to create the right incentives in the right direction to help all companies to move forward, and not just leave to the leader alone. Yeah, because that's very subjective.
True.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a lot for today to take in.
Yeah, I'm amazed that I have so much to share.
Thanks a lot for being with us. And we'll try and catch up before the next 5 years are up.
Yep. Maybe the world will be very different then.
And thanks to listeners. Lex Novus. We'll see you again next time.